have Donald Trump's chart behind me. And for those of you who know how to read the chart, or even those of you who don't, I'll just go through it. This is a Leo rising sign. Leo rising sign is with Mars in the first house, Jupiter retrograde. It's actually stationary direct. I'll explain that. In the second house of Virgo, nothing in Libra. Moon Ketu in the fourth house in Scorpio. Nothing until we get around to Sun Rahu in Taurus. And a couple things of note. Two things to put up here of note. This is 29 degrees. 2949. 2949. Almost Gemini. And this is 0042. So Saturn is barely in Cancer and the Sun is barely in Taurus. It's almost in Gemini. So he won the election. Trump was in Rahu Mars Dasha when he won the election, and he went into it. I think it was in October of 2015. That's when he entered it, and he just left November 14th of this year. So he was in Rahu Mars from October 2015 until November 14th, 2016. So since the election finished, he changed dashas and he went into Jupiter dasha. He just started Jupiter, which is a 16-year cycle. And this was the end of an 18-year cycle. End of 18-year cycle. So he just ended this 18-year cycle. I'm not going to be answering any questions on this. I'm just going to be stating. So it's best not to ask a bunch of questions right now. If I do, it might be later. So he just ended an 18-year cycle last week on the 21st. I'm sorry, on the 14th. On the 14th of November, he just ended that long cycle of Rahu. And if you don't know, Rahu is a time of confusion. It's a time of where we're working through, cycling through a certain type of confusion based on where Rahu is, what he joins, and all of that. And in Rahu, and in his chart, his Rahu is in the 10th house. This is the 10th house. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 10th house, Rahu, with the sun, his ruling planet. With the sun, his ruling planet, in the 10th house of career, impact, power. Basically, his Rahu Dasha was a time for 18 years when he's saying, how much power do I have? And when Rahu is with the sun, Rahu eclipses things, especially the sun. And he says, what's the power? What's the power I have? Rahu is the counterfeit version of power. And he gets that power from the sun. He derives the power from the sun. So in Rahu Dasha, whether Rahu has joined the sun or not, just in Rahu Dasha in general, is a time when we are encountering our potential to abuse power and to drink the counterfeit version of power, to be seduced by our potential to be powerful. Rahu is a head that's disconnected from the rest of the body. And this head says, this is the real power. Okay, I'm going to devour and eat incessantly and just gobble up and devour whatever I can. So I can experience that. In his life, his Rahu in the 10th house shows literally, when Rahu's in the 10th house, it's actually very good for career and fulfilling the highest power, because Rahu is about power and the 10th house is about power. So Rahu Dasha with Rahu in the 10th, even just forget the sun is there. Just Rahu in the 10th is going to be really empowered in Rahu Dasha to want to manifest and to be obsessed and focused on it. Plus this Rahu is in Taurus, which is very powerful to stabilize that and keep him focused on one thing. In this case, the reason Rahu is stabilized in Taurus is because it's about materiality. So this is why his Rahu Dasha was very much about accomplishment and a relentless obsession over it. And because it was joined his ruling planet, the sun, there's a powerful rule in Vedic astrology that says Rahu gives the results first based on the planet that it rules as a house lord. So his sun is the first lord in the 10th, which is a trine lord in an angle. And Rahu forms a Raja Yoga when it's in an angle with a trine lord or a trine with an angle lord, and it fulfills that main condition. This is why his Rahu Dasha was so strong for him and showed so much accomplishment, not just ambition. Rahu in the 10th would show ambition regardless. But Rahu in the 10th with the sun fulfilled the ambition because it connected it to his dharma and his purpose to brand everything. In Rahu Dasha, this is when Trump truly became successful in a stable way. Before that, his success was up and down, which I'll talk about in a second. But he became a successful brander and branding his name in Rahu Dasha. Most of Trump's business now is him, is the Trump name, the brand. They slap the name on the side of a building, and Trump and his expertise helps make the property successful, but Trump doesn't actually build it. So most of his success has been as a brander, not to mention, like through his TV show, through media. And, oh, I forgot. I knew I forgot something. I forgot this. Mercury. Sorry. And Mercury is in Ardra Nakshatra. Ardra Nakshatra, which is ruled by Rahu. So this is why in his Rahu Dasha, his success came through branding and pushing his image and persona out, Rahu in the 10th with the sun, and media. Media. He became a TV star. A TV star. Just like me. No, kidding. Mercury's in Ardra. Ardra is ruled by Rahu. So the planets produce what they rule in their dashas. Okay? So in Rahu Dasha, it gave the results of Rahu in the 10th with the sun, forming a powerful Raja Yoga around his identity. That's why his capacity to brand himself was so successful in Rahu Dasha. And it activated Mercury in his 11th house, very powerful Mercury in Gemini, and he became a media star. Communication became his big skill. Look at how skilled he is in communicating, not through his words, but through media, like Twitter and manipulating the media. Because you wonder, people who are really focused on his words wonder, how could this person ever win based on the things he said? How? He contradicts himself constantly. He is a walking, a walking contradiction. If you want to be more aggressive, he's a constant liar. He constantly does not tell the truth, at least when he was campaigning. He's starting to be a lot more measured now, which is what I'm going to talk about now. But it's because the communication is not to be precise with him, it's to get what he wants, especially in Rahu Dasha. Rahu is about saying, I want a lot of power. And Mercury helps him get it by communicating whatever needs to be communicated to get what I want, which is power. I want you to understand this motivation and when dashas shift. That's been his motivation in Rahu Dasha, and particularly because it rules Mercury in Gemini, which is very skilled to figure out, okay, you know what? It doesn't matter if I say what's real or what's true, but if I create a kind of firestorm, a kind of Twitter storm tornado, and everybody starts talking about that, then they're not going to be talking about the fact that I don't have a lot of experience, or I'm not releasing my tax returns, or this or that, or whatever it is that could be damaging. And if I use this communication to just attack the other person or do this and let everybody kind of do that, see, this is how his Mercury not only has been, but is, basically, on some level. Especially in Rahu Dasha, his Mercury being ruled by Rahu has created this like very unreliable communication, especially for people that are very thoughtful and who pay attention to words. Donald Trump has completely let them down. People like me, and maybe people like you. I will say, those of you who are real Trump supporters have noticed probably that I'm not a big fan. And much of the world is very concerned now because of this utterly confusing and in fact manipulative communication style that we've come to see from him. This aggressive communication style. And it's very concerning to the world. And we're not sure what's going to happen because of that nature. So the point is, though, and what made it kind of even strange about predicting the election is to see that he had this 18-year Dasha cycle ending, based on the birth time we have, 6 days after the election. No, not even 6 days. Yeah, 6 days after the election almost begged a rectification because it's so close. But let's assume that it's correct, because Rahu Mars showed him at the height of his power, because not only was Rahu showing this Raja Yoga, but then Mars in his first house is another powerful Raja Yoga. This is where he gets that courage to just fight and fight all the time. He's got Mars in the first house of Leo. So again, another powerful Raja Yoga. Now it's the ruler of a trine in an angle. Again, this is another Raja Yoga. When you get the lords of trines and angles, or angles and trines, in their Dasha cycle, they produce powerful results. So in Rahu Mars, it was enormously powerful. The other thing that made Mars so extraordinarily powerful for him to win, in spite of everything, has to do with nakshatras. So it doesn't just show, like we saw here, Rahu rules Mercury because it's an Ardra nakshatra, but Mars also rules Mrigashira, which is where Sun and Rahu are. So both his Sun and Rahu are in Mrigashira nakshatra. They're in Mrigashira nakshatra. So his Rahu Mars, with Mars in Mrigashira nakshatra. Oh, I've been told that the chart looks backwards from the way you're looking at it. I guess it does, doesn't it? Well, try to imagine this going the other way then. It looks forward to me, and I'm the one looking at it, so sorry if it looks backwards. I'll post a chart in the comments as well, if it's hard for you to follow. But yeah, this is Leo and whatnot, but I'll post an image of his chart. But Rahu Mars, Sun Rahu in the 10th house, Rahu rules that Raja Yoga, and then Mars is a Raja Yoga in the first house, because it's a 9th lord in the first, which is the Raja Yoga, really connecting him with his dharma and his purpose. And Mars rules Rahu and Sun. So Mars rules the Raja Yoga in the 10th house, literally rules it. And when planets rule the Raja Yoga, not just activate it because it is a Raja Yoga planet, but when it rules the Raja Yoga, especially both planets, and they're both in the same nakshatra in the 10th house, and then the planet runs that rules both of them, kaboom. Especially when it's coming underneath the Mahadasha of one of the planets as well. Like bang, 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 bang. So when I looked at the chart before, when I looked last year, at first, and he was in Rahu Moon, I said, when he was in Rahu Moon and he first burst on the scene making outlandish comments, I said, if he makes it to Rahu Mars, and he hasn't flamed out and blown himself up, if he makes it to Rahu Mars, he'll probably win the Republican nomination, but I think he'll lose the general election because he's going to be so divisive, he's never going to get more people to vote for him. I wound up not being correct about that prediction of him not winning, but we didn't know who his opponent would be, and I never made a formal prediction because I didn't have a good chart for Hillary Clinton. But notwithstanding, I totally saw and could understand that Rahu Mars could definitely make him president. But even if it didn't make him president, again, people need to understand, because a lot of people make the prediction that I could tell by his chart that he would win. I'm just going to depart a little bit from that and say you really can't, because he could have still been the Republican nominee and gone all the way to Election Day like he did and completely fulfilled the conditions of this Raja Yoga. because it shows the most power he's ever had and the largest platform he's ever had. Rahu Mars. So he still could have gone all the way and lost and still fulfilled the Raja Yoga of Rahu Mars. This is why it was hard to make a prediction. From my point of view, it was impossible because we have to compare it to something. We have to compare it to the other persons because, again, we already saw the Rahu Mars Raja Yoga fulfilled by where he was by the time the election came. It was the highest, most powerful he's ever been, confounding expectations, but we didn't have the other chart. So now that we see what's happened, and then he just changed Rahu Mars and went into Jupiter. Now we want to look at the Jupiter Dasha. Again, I didn't consider that the chart would be backwards, so I do apologize that you guys are looking at the chart and this looks like Capricorn probably. I don't know. I'm trying to visualize what it would look like backwards. This probably looks like Capricorn, Aquarius. So anyway, it is this way. So anyway, the Jupiter Dasha began in November 14th this year, and I said on the brief, on the video that I did right after the election that his Jupiter Dasha offered a certain amount of hope, obviously, because from Rahu to Jupiter is a big shift. And I said one of the things that's going to be really important and prominent in Jupiter Dasha has to do with things like legal battles, legal struggles. Jupiter is a planet of the legal system, and it shows our relationship to, through things that are righteous or not righteous, where we've, potentially done things that are wrong and have a legal remedy and have to face it. And again, this is also biased because I know his story and I see what was coming up, and I see, and I even said that this possible legal issue, legal trouble could be right around the corner already. He settled one lawsuit. If he had gone to court, when you go to court, you open up all kinds of potential minefields like exploration, and then you got to tell the truth under oath, lying under oath, definitely an impeachable offense. By the way, that's why Bill Clinton was impeached. He wasn't impeached because he had an affair in the White House. That's not an impeachable offense. It's not very nice, but it's not impeachable. It's not against the law. What he did was he lied in a deposition about it. And the deposition had nothing to do with that. It had to do with the Paula Jones trial. So it was a whole kind of thing where lying under oath is an impeachable offense, lying to a grand jury about something. So if Trump ever goes into court for any of these lawsuits, if he doesn't settle them, he will be subject to inquiry, which means they get to ask him all kinds of questions that he must answer. Things like about taxes and all kinds of stuff that he probably doesn't want to get into. And so one of the features of his Jupiter Dasha now is going to be these things that have to do with ethics, morals, legality. We can already see this a mile away already with what's happened, not even to get into the judgment about people that he's appointing or whatever, but we already see this fast and loose approach with ethics and separating his business from being president, and the obvious conflicts of interest that every other president has clearly absolved himself of. And Trump has even come out already, just blithely saying, well, I can run the country fantastic and run my businesses fantastic. Like I can do all of it. And there is no conflict of interest because the president is not legally, the president can't have a conflict of interest. That's the way he said it. It's not the way it works. There's nothing legal. I don't know why this needs to be amended, but every other government employee must absolve themselves from the appearance of conflict of interest, like Hillary Clinton. All that stuff that Trump said, that all the Republicans said about Hillary Clinton and the conflict of interest with Clinton Foundation and pay to play and all of that stuff, Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State had to sign on to that. As president, Trump doesn't. For some reason, the president is absolved of that. I don't know why. I really don't. It's kind of remarkable. I don't even know if that's the word. But because of that kind of exemption, he says, well, the president can't have a conflict of interest. That's actually not true. He certainly can. And if there were a conflict of interest, he would also be accountable for it. If there was a Democratic Senate, he would absolutely be pressured to clean that up. And we're going to start to see some outcry about this in the Senate and pressure on Republicans to also call this out. And for him to become a benevolent leader, which is what Jupiter is about. And conflicts of interest and playing fast and loose with the rules is going to be a big theme of his Jupiter Dasha. And we'll see how he handles that. But this is a symptom or a sort of version of someone stepping into a higher level of morality, accountability, and feeling the gravitas of the office impress upon them the need to elevate their game. This is very much Jupiter stuff. So whether you think he's capable of it or not, whether you think Trump, oh, he'll never change, he'll always be on the take, I don't know what I think at this point, how much he'll be able to do this or not, but these are the karmas that he's getting now. He just left the karmas of, I'm a Rahu monster trying to get the most power I possibly can, and I'll do anything to get it, and I'll destroy and fight and battle and struggle, whatever I need to do to get the most power I can get, which was Rahu Mars. And again, he would have fulfilled that even if he'd have lost the election. But after Rahu Mars, we go into Jupiter, which is, okay, what's the bigger lesson now? What do I do with this power? Now that I've been hypnotized by winning and this bloodthirsty desire to win, now that I've won, or even if I haven't won, what do I do with that? What's the lesson that I learned? This is why Jupiter comes after Rahu. This is why Jupiter Dasha comes after Rahu Dasha, in my opinion. Because the 18-year hypnotic entanglement of Rahu leads to a lesson, hopefully, in Jupiter. And so his Jupiter is stationary direct. So it shows up as retrograde. It was actually the last day of retrograde. It was actually station. And the next day, it started moving direct. And so stationary direct, first of all, it's like stuck. It's not really moving. It's not moving in the sky. So if you look at the degrees, it's 24 degrees 20 minutes, where it had been for like 2 or 3 days, and then it starts to move 24, 21, 2 days after. And so what happens when a planet is stationary is it's literally like kind of stuck. You can look at it as it's been sitting there within like 1 degree for a month. It stays at that place, 24 Virgo. So it's what you might call very powerful, but again, powerful, you need to be careful to think that's good. It's not necessarily, quote, good, because you'll hear people say, well, it looks retrograde, but it's actually stationary direct, which is good. Well, it's not necessarily good. It's kind of sitting there. It's stuck. So it becomes very focused and concentrated. It can also be what you might say stubborn. It can be kind of in its thing and not moving. And again, there's an obstinance to that kind of energy that maybe is somewhat resistant to change, you might say. So it can show a lot of fixed qualities. But what are the qualities? That's what's important. Of course, it's the second house. It's the 5th house ruler in the second house. It's also the 8th house ruler in the second house. And it's Jupiter. So how can we see Jupiter in his chart anyway? How can we see his Jupiter in his nature? Well, the second house is about speech. Jupiter is about big stuff. 5th house is creative. Usually there's some benefit. 8th house is change and destructiveness. Jupiter is also about wealth and big stuff, especially Jupiter in the second. And whether it's stationary or not, it's still a retrograde quality to it because it was moving back. It hadn't moved forward yet, so there is a retrograde feel to it, which tends to go forward and go back and change and go this way and that way. So you can really see this Jupiter as in his nature to do exactly what we've seen him do. Second house is about speech, big speech, exaggerated. Leos tend to have exaggerated speech anyway, because the second lord also rules the 11th house. They're the same planet. And for him, it's a very powerful one, Mercury, like I already said. So for Leo, this is why Leo tends to have big dramatic speech anyway, because it's the same planet that rules it. And they're very confident in it, Mercury. They like the big speech, and they can get away with it a lot. Leo can get away with exaggerating a lot and all. We don't really mind so much. They're just kind of like that. But Leo can also tend to brag, to like braggadocio and all that kind of thing, just by nature. Forget if Jupiter is there or not. It's just a quality of Leo that they need to be careful of. You put Jupiter there in the second house, it's going to make it bigger. It's going to make it even bigger. Yeah, I got this, I got that. I think most people probably understand that he doesn't have $10 billion. I'm just going to flat out say a few things. If you're not a Trump fan, you might not like it, but I'm going to say it. He probably exaggerates how much money he has. Probably doesn't have, and in fact, we've seen it on the tax statements and the financial statements that we've seen. He overvalues things when he talks about them, then he undervalues them when he reports them. He said one of his golf courses is only worth like $50,000 when he has to pay taxes on it, but when he's talking about it, it's worth $500 million. It's just using communication as a way to get something. This is what you see. And this is what you see with someone who is a demagogue. And he demagogues issues. Demagogue means that you just make them big and distorted, and you don't focus on detail and precision. You focus on making a big story and a big to-do about something. And we see him do that. And not just now, he's done it his whole career. He got all these people to invest in all these casinos and overextend, exaggerate how much liquidity he actually had, how much these things are actually worth, got all these people to invest and ran them into the ground with his bankruptcies, to the point to where he had to be put on like a retainer by his investors. So again, exaggerating, overextending, and then having to go back and correct, make a lot of what looks like a lot of money, but then bankruptcy and forward and back and forward. Not just with his words, but with his finances, with his money. But through it all, there's a kind of license that we give. Leo tends to be able to get away with more of that than others because of that confidence and that braggadocio. And him, that Mars in the first, he's unapologetic, like, yeah, whatever. Just, and you kind of don't have any foothold to grab onto. Again, Jupiter stuff, it's very big and amorphous. So we see this quality of Jupiter in his nature already, and the potential for it to benefit him, and the benefit that it gets him. This is why he does it. It's not just bluster. I also don't think all of it is strategy either. People, I think, attach too much. Oh, he's a genius. He knows exactly what he's doing. Actually, no, he doesn't. He comes out, puts his foot in his mouth a lot, and then has to correct it. He does it all the time. And I want to say that we especially can see it even more now since the election. You already see the indications of Jupiter already. It's amazing, actually, how much more restrained he's been since the election. I know the standard is really low. And one of the things we have to do as a culture is not just be thankful that he's not acting like a crazy person now and go, oh, well, at least he's not doing that. That's great. That's progress. We can't lower the standard. We have to still hold him to the standard that a president needs to be held to. That's my opinion. And not lower expectations, grading on a curve. Well, at least he's not attacking the cast of Hamilton for the whole weekend, okay? At least it's only 2 tweets. Well, he shouldn't be doing it at all. He's supposed to be president. He's going to be president. He shouldn't be attacking the media at all. We shouldn't just cheer the fact that after having a tantrum against the New York Times, he changed his mind and went and met with them and actually acted like a human being toward the... I mean, that's not an accomplishment. doing something that you should already be doing is not something you need to get complimented on. So we need to, we need to be aware of that quality, but we still already see, since his Jupiter Dasha, that he's more moderate now in realizing, okay, I sent this tweet, well, he'll delete it, he'll take it back, he'll change, realizing that he's not in the Jupiter. He's thinking, Christ, I won, now I gotta be Jupiter. And that's literally what the Dasha shift shows. You want to understand, when he was in Rahu Dasha, it's like he was being Rahu. He was being Rahu Mars. I'll say whatever the hell I want. I'll destroy, fight, argue, accuse. It doesn't matter. I'll do whatever the hell I want. I'm Rahu Mars right now. I'm a demon. I'm here to I'm going to take over the world. Sorry, I just had a message pop up on my screen. Now he's in Jupiter, and he's like, okay, now I have to be Jupiter. I can't do that anymore. And you see him stepping into a role that's much more subdued, more statesmanlike, and he's trying to hang on to a lot of that, the remnants of that, because it's a big part of who he is. It's a big part of his power. So the thing we need to understand is that I feel like there's great hope. I don't say great hope. There's hope. Let me not exaggerate. There's hope that his level of maturity will be enhanced now that he's no longer the demon loose on the world trying to win at all costs. Okay, dude, now you won. Now you need to be Jupiter, and he's aware of it. This is how karma works, by the way. Everyone's karma. This is how it works. It comes and we step into it. And as much as we're capable, we fulfill it. We fulfill it to our capacity. The other thing to understand is no matter what, no matter how well we're fulfilling it, we all feel like we're fulfilling it the way it should be. Inside his head, he's always Jupiter. He's always inspiring. He's always that way. And as he's going through his Jupiter Dasha, again, now that he's actually getting the karmas of that, it's going to elevate his station, because especially with Jupiter, I'll say, especially with Jupiter, the Sattvic planets, but Jupiter probably the most. The best thing to do in a Jupiter situation is to step into the role. What I mean to say is that whenever anyone goes into a Jupiter Dasha, for example, or a sub-period, especially if it's something like the 5th and 8th Lord, like for Leo, I tell them, you need to teach something now. Like, you need to step up a little bit and share what you know, because that's the role of Jupiter. And when you step into the natural station of the planet, you get the full power relative to what you're capable of. It comes through you. What I mean to say is you don't realize the fullness of Jupiter until you step up and teach and become Jupiter. And now we see him in that role. That's what Jupiter is. The president is going to be a guide, a figure that we all want to inspire us, and you can see him wanting to be an inspiring figure. And if he's not an inspiring figure, he's going to let himself down. You want to understand, this is what I mean to say when I try to convey that relative to his standard, he's going to feel like, or he's going to feel the pressure to inspire everyone. And be an inspiring figure and rise to the challenge of being the leader for all of us. And again, you hear the rhetoric is kind of disconnected. It's almost like he's saying, okay, we need to come together now. We need to come together as one people. Basically saying, you need to come together. Because we haven't really heard the big speech where he comes out and says, okay, you all need to come together. And even though I just appointed Steve Bannon and these other Republican all these hardcore people that go right in the face of every hateful, horrible thing I said the last year and a half. Okay, we need to come together as a nation. It's like, okay, how about you first, since you opened all this up? Since you opened all this up, how about you help us come together? Because we're not just making some stuff up and kind of licking our wounds. And so, again, you can see he really is trying to get it. And relative to what he is able to put forth, we'll be able to see how his capacity as a teacher and a guide and a minister comes forth. Those of you confused about the chart who came late, the chart is reversed. I wrote it according to the way I see it, and it looks reversed. So if someone wants to, you could post a chart. You could post a picture of his chart in the thread instead of the constant conversation about the chart. So that's that. So the Jupiter Dasha is going to bring out his 5th and his 8th houses. Now, the 5th house is very much about teaching. Especially for a Leo person, it's a very dharmic planet. So the 5th house having to do with inspiring others, leading others, and connecting to his heart's desire could be very important, but it's predominantly the 8th lord. One of the reasons I said if he wins, it's going to be hard is because Jupiter rules the 5th and the 8th house, and the 8th house is dominant to the 5th. So it's primarily the 8th lord, which has to do with death, transformation, change. And I'm reading it for him. So it's predominantly his 8th house ruler. And like I said, the 8th house has to do with death, sudden and shocking change and transformation, which we've already seen. He never thought he was going to win. He's shocked. He's kind of mortified right now, I would imagine. I don't have to imagine. Oh, on some level he is. He's like, oh my God, now I have to actually be president. Ugh. In his case, it's probably not a bad thing because it's going to make him take this seriously. We already see a lot of changes and transformations in him as well. We can see this every day when we hear about him. Oh, I talked to a general. I saw it today on the news. When he talked to the person who might be the defense secretary, he was shocked to hear the defense secretary say torture doesn't work. Like, wow, welcome to reality. Welcome to inquiry. Like, everybody knows torture is an effective method of information gathering. Everybody knows if you're torturing someone, they'll say anything to make you stop torturing them. It's not effective. If you torture someone and ask them any question, they'll say whatever they think you want to hear, so you'll stop. Everybody, it's not a secret. It's just not, but in his mind, and even his statement afterward was his statements were like, okay, so they're chopping off heads, burning people, and we can't even waterboard? Again, the thing that's so scary about Trump is when you hear things like that, you realize you don't even understand why we would torture. We don't do it to get revenge. Like, okay, so they get to do that to us and we don't get to do it to them? Like, that's his answer. That's what he used to justify those things. And he's getting an edumacation, and it's transforming him. And he's like, oh, okay, so in other words, all the stuff I said, like, okay, maybe I need to rethink this idea I had about torture, because this guy who's the real deal just said, you know what, dude? You don't get anywhere with torture. Much better to, what do you say, give him a pack of cigarettes and a beer than to torture him. You don't get any good information that way. And Trump is like, oh, okay. But so many things that he said, like all this stuff about, you see him backpedaling and changing and transforming on all of these things he said. Obamacare, well, some of it's okay. Prosecute Hillary Clinton, well, probably not. You see him in this 8th house, like, all right, his whole paradigm is shifting. I mean, think of how much he said all this stuff to our benefit, or to the benefit of my sense of hope. The same thing that made him say anything to kind of get elected, and his positions changing constantly, shows that his positions are not locked in stone. I think most people who were looking and paying attention and using discrimination saw this the whole time. you're sitting there looking at all of these people in the Rust Belt and all these people that think Donald Trump is going to be their big champion, and you're saying, can't you see that this guy he's not locked into what he's saying. He's saying this because he thinks it's going to get him elected. And that's not that he doesn't want to do it or that he can't think that he doesn't want to help working people and all. I think that's a core conviction he has, but since he hasn't thought it through and doesn't really have solutions, and is a big rich guy who is also talking about all these tax breaks and all this other stuff, that's not going to affect these coal miners or these people who work, who are expecting all of these manufacturing jobs to come back. Look at his policies. More tax breaks to the wealthy, deregulating Wall Street. I mean, all of this stuff. And again, the fact that that his positions are so fluid and they change so much that like we saw in the campaign while he was running for president, actually gives me a little bit of hope, because all of that stuff he said is not etched in stone, as we can see. He's changing on all of it now as he's actually learning. As he's actually learning what's happening, he's changing those positions. He's like, oh, that's right, torture, not a good thing. Because it's the dasha of his eighth lord. The eighth lord is transforming all of this stuff. The eighth lord is changing all of his views and aligning him with Dharma, fifth house. So Jupiter is primarily the eighth lord for Leo. Eighth lord is dominant to the fifth, and it shows where when Leos connect with a higher purpose, let's walk through it. It starts with Karaka, dominant bhava, secondary bhava. When Leos connect with their higher purpose, Jupiter as the Karaka, it transforms them, eighth house, and connects them more to their true heart's desire and sense of guidance and fellowship. It's very easy to not properly evaluate the planets and the dominant bhavas they rule. And in Brihat Parashara, it's very clear the eighth house is dominant to the fifth. We're already seeing it. We're already seeing Trump totally transform. Again, we cannot just say, oh, well, great, at least he's not as out of his mind as he was the last year and a half. We need to apply a standard that we would expect from any president, not just because he's better than he was. We can't grade on a curve. The country and the world are at stake. But we already see him changing and backpedaling on things. Again, we also see him appointing these hardline people to cabinet positions. But it's early. He could change this. We have to see what's going to happen. And his higher, the thing I want to convey is within himself. Within himself, he is going to do everything he can to rise to the highest Jupiter that he's capable of. And one thing is, no one thinks when they're in Jupiter Dasha, no one thinks that they're living out of alignment with higher purpose. So he's going to have a standard of humanity, integrity, compassion within himself that's totally different than it was in Rahu Dasha. Don't misunderstand these dashas. When they shift, they totally shift. Now, it still functions within the same person. It's still the same person, and it doesn't elevate beyond someone's capacity. Someone who's got that Jupiter doesn't become someone who has like a Jupiter in Sagittarius or Pisces. But we can see where his button-down approach, it's Jupiter in Virgo, very much about the details, even the common man. You can see why he has a certain affection for the workers and the common man, and I think he does. I think it's true. I think, and by all reports, he's always had a kind of affinity for like the workers on some level at the construction sites and stuff. I mean, I don't want to overstate it, but I think he does really feel a certain sincerity to want to help and make things better and work through all the details. And we're going to see how much of it now as we see him change and transform. Hopefully, Hopefully, his incredibly thin skin doesn't show him change and transform into a monster and say, screw it, I got the power now, you do what I say, I'm the king, and I'm going to because he has enormously thin skin, and that's shown by this moon K2, debilitated moon with K2 aspected by Mars in the 4th. There ain't nothing fun about that. This is why you hardly see the man laugh. He's always scowling. He's so you can just see if you have much reflection, you can see how just emotionally stressed he is. Such thin skin. And hopefully, once he starts doing the job of president, he can elevate and not just continue in this cycle of getting attention, which is what he's been in. This whole Leo, Rahu, Leo, this Leo person with Sun in the 10th joined Rahu, which is just, I want to be the center of attention, creating a lot of drama. This is the problem, the biggest problem that I felt, the reason I thought he would not be good as president. A couple main reasons. The first one is just the lack of grasp of the issues, especially things like talking about torture and saying people would torture them if I gave them the order. Actually, one of the things that came out is that he realized, and everybody should realize this, you would think if he understood what he was doing while he was running for president, talking about these things, he would get it, but the CIA and the people that have to carry out those orders will refuse the order if it's against the Geneva Convention or if it's illegal. And Trump even said things like, they wouldn't refuse my order, believe me. He says, believe me. When he was asked at a debate, what about torture? And he's like, so they get to chop off heads and we don't get to do anything? And they're like, but don't you realize that they're bound by rules of engagement and conduct and legality? They would refuse the order. What would you do then? He's like, they wouldn't refuse my order, believe me. And it sent chills down my spine to think that this person would say that at a debate, frankly, and that the whole world wouldn't explode and just disqualify him, because it was such a disqualifying moment. But to see that he now gets it is encouraging, at least, to say, okay, you get it now. You can't turn soldiers into war criminals and make yourself a war criminal either. That would not be good. But to see that he now gets that is good. The other thing that scared me and that made me think he would be a bad president is just the kind of stuff that we already see now. Just the constant drama, just everything revolving around him and sucking up all the oxygen in the country all the time. I mean, look at how often you hear about Obama. Obama is there's a nickname, no drama Obama, right? Whether or not you like him or not, we just go about living our life. We don't have our whole life hijacked by the drama of what the president is doing and saying and creating a distraction all the time. This would not be good for the world, in my opinion. Who knows how it would affect international markets or all kinds of stuff that we all just take for granted. And the potential ethics violations that we're already seeing that hopefully he gets cleaned up. If not, there could be a lot of legal problems. This is the thing. Part of this evolution of Jupiter that I'm talking about is for him to get it. For him to get it and say, all right, I need to clean it up, put clear firewalls between me and my business and all this. Otherwise, what's going to happen is he's going to be in all kinds of legal trouble, the whole administration. He will definitely get into legal trouble. Impeachment, it's hard to say because impeachment is a political process and you need the Republicans to do that. People who say, oh, don't worry, he'll get impeached so quick. Don't count on it. Don't count on it. I think you will see pressure if he does. If there's already been very, very disturbing trends coming out of the White House now, just about his apparent lack of concern for it's not even appearance of conflict of interest, it's a conflict of interest. He reached out to the British official, Nigel Farage, talked to him about removing windmills at his Scottish golf course. Wind turbines that he wanted done. He talked to the president of Venezuela. He's got business dealings there. He talked to the president of Japan with Ivanka Trump in the room, and they got business. This is just absolutely inexcusable, excuse me. He hasn't taken the oath yet, but any appearance of this once he becomes president, and the press and the Democrats and everybody is going to just bore into him like they should. It's absolutely unacceptable. And you don't know. He might just fight and just turn into this big goddamn war. Excuse my language. But that kind of thing, that would be a disaster. And I'm saying that I'm hopeful that because this Jupiter, it's going to start to sink in. Like maybe a couple battles and then he'll start to get it or something. But it could be... if there's a lot of trouble, or even if there's not a lot of trouble, you're going to see the issues and the themes of Jupiter being completely at the forefront. And his ability or inability to aspire and rise to a legal standard that we expect and need to demand of a president, and not some, well, that's just Trump being Trump, some watered down, diluted standard just because it's him. It doesn't matter if it's him. He's not what's important. The country's important. The tradition, the law is important. And you'll see that happen. And if he's not able to do that, he's going to be mired in all kinds of legal trouble. If he can elevate, and it's possible. I do think it's possible. I hold out hope that it won't be as bad as we think. It's already not. He's already backed up. He's already shown that he's switched on a lot of things. Even the wall. Well, maybe there'll be a fence. He's just kind of, and I knew he would do that anyway. I already knew that a lot of that stuff he was saying when he was running, that again, that's one of the biggest problems. You don't know where he's going to land on things. But he's so unreliable. So there could be so many different ethical and moral violations that would just mire the president, the presidency, in all kinds of trouble, not to mention if he doesn't allow wisdom to come in and change some of his just frankly dangerous ideas about other countries and other entanglements, like on the global scale, on the geopolitical scale, North Korea, and all of the delicate situations we have all around the world. So that's generally what I would say. That I'll say this last thing. I also think, and I'm not making the prediction because it's hard to make the prediction to know, and I frankly, some people make a big deal out of predictions. To be honest with you, I really don't anymore. I used to make a big deal out of it. It takes a long time to figure stuff out, and I predicted the last elections because I had good birth times. This time, I didn't make a formal prediction, but along the way, I kept thinking, as a matter of personal opinion, that this thing is going to sink him. This thing is going to sink him, and it didn't. Even if it had sunk him, he would have still fulfilled the promise of that Rahu Mars, but it didn't sink him, and he won. Because there was no good birth time with Hillary, I didn't make a formal prediction. But I'm not making a prediction now, but there could still be some situations between now and Inauguration Day. We still have the electors that need to, from the Electoral College. We already hear signs of some major defectors. And if you want to effect that change, there are ways to do it. Even now, they're talking about potential voter fraud in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. And the Democrats could file an appeal to have a vote, to have recounts. I'm not sure that's going to happen, but I definitely don't hold out the possibility that we may have the Electoral College, the actual electors. I think it's going to be a bigger story as we get to it. I'm not saying it'll be enough to deprive or to deny Trump the election, but there's no question that we're already seeing a campaign to do that, and it could be very interesting because it happens December 19th, which is the day Mercury goes retrograde, or the day after. Mercury's like stationary retrograde that day. Retrograde's notorious for shifting some things. And frankly, there's a case to be made. And I'll just tell you my personal view. There are ways to email the electoral representatives to make a case for not confirming Trump. And it was in the, in the Constitution, in the Federalist Papers, where is a provision. This is why we have the Electoral College. If someone is so highly unqualified that you think that there was a hedge against someone literally like Trump, who has never held office, who hasn't shown like the temperament, maturity, on some level even the understanding of the separation of business and all of this, that this is why electors have to go and elect him and place a vote for him. And they might not. And there is a case to be made already for that not being in the best interests of the country. Appointing Steve Bannon, his complete failure to understand the difference between him as president and him as running a multinational company and the conflicts of interest. That's really the scariest thing right now that I see. Those two things, these appointments and his unwillingness to put aside his own self-interest for the good of the country. Again, I'm not saying I think that'll happen, but it could, and it's going to be an issue. And it wouldn't be surprising, especially with him starting his Jupiter Dasha and completely flipping everything around. That's what Eighth Lord does. A shocking sort of outcome. Could happen. If it doesn't, and he winds up taking an electoral oath and he winds up being president, I've already talked about that scenario. Where I think where him in the role of president, in the role of Jupiter, him having to now live Jupiter is definitely going to elevate a certain part of his mind and consciousness toward greater compassion, forgiveness. Who knows how much? Who knows if it's enough? Who knows if it can? Who knows how much of that in ratio to his obvious narcissism and need for attention and thin-skinned and combativeness? Who knows relative to that mix it's going to make? How much of a difference it'll make? Of course, I don't know. But personally, I would like to not see it, but if he does become president, I don't think it'll be as bad as we think on that level. I think it's very possible that he can step into something that would be even surprising to a lot of us. But again, it's surprising to a lot of us by comparison to what? Godzilla? I mean, we have to, that's the other part of it. So I don't think it'll be as bad as people think. But at the same time, there's going to be serious problems, I think, with his ethics, his morals, his lack of statesmanship. That's by comparison. We're already seeing by comparison, it's much lower. And we can't settle. We can't say, well, it's just because it's him. That doesn't work. And it's not going to work once he becomes president. You're not going to see the Congress and the country just roll over because somehow... By the way, this man will wind up losing the popular vote by a couple million votes. It's not even close. So there's going to be a lot going on. So anyway, this is getting close to an hour at this point, and I'm going to end it here. There was a lot of comments, too much for me to pay attention to. I do apologize that the chart is backwards. I wrote it for myself, and sorry about that, but I'll post a JPEG of the chart under the video so people can comment and look and see the actual chart. I described it when I did it, but yeah, so it is. All right. Take care.